Going. Welcome back to the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast. It's yet another interview for us on the channel, and today we're talking about someone who, well, he writes for a company called BodySlam, but more important than that, has a love of TNA that is like mine. It is Gerard Ryan from BodySlam.net. How are you doing?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
Not too bad. It's I don't know what it's like in America these days, but it's freezing over here in the UK.
Buddy, I'm right outside of Chicago and it's about negative 10 degrees today. So,
Not as cold there, not as cold here then. Is there any snow or ice? How is it looking?
it snowed last week. It's not, but I mean, it turned into ice, but it's still there.
Wow. Well, it kind of was weird, isn't it? Because you had one part of America that had the snow and the other part had the fires. It was kind of like a multitude of different bad weather in one go.
Yeah, I'd rather just get it, separately and then instead of getting it all at once, but whatever.
Yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, thanks for joining. Before we get to TNA, let's talk. How did it all come about with you and Body Slam?
It's actually funny because I would just promote like TNA on like my social media, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. And their former managing editor, Corey Brown, who works for Fightful now,
Yeah.
he just hit me up one day and he's like, "Hey man, I see you like TNA, you like covering it. Like, I don't know if you've ever thought about getting in the space before, but we're looking for somebody to cover TNA." So I was like, "Well, I never thought I'd get into this space, and you can just teach me as we go, I guess." And that's how it started.
Unbelievable. So, in terms of wrestling, what was it? Was it always TNA? Did you have any WWE or WCW before that?
Uh, yeah, I was a huge WCW fan back in the day, and then when they died out, like I was like the first couple of years after WCW, and then it was like ECW and all that merged with WWE. It was all right, and then like I just fell off. Like it got dumb, and they were the only game in town, so they weren't really like. And then I started getting into TNA when it was like Kurt Angle was there, Sting was there. I was like, oh man, they actually got some good stars over there, and they're on like a regular TV channel that I can watch. So that started getting me in there. And then Hogan
Interesting.
came over, and I thought that would turn out a lot better than it was. But Hogan got me in over there too.
Did. Yeah, we'll get into all of that. When obviously you hear about these new promotions, and obviously Jeff Jarrett and Jerry Jarrett was behind it, is it always a case of like, let's just wait and see what happens? Because we over here in the UK, we didn't get TNA for quite some time, and we always heard of good things, but we never saw it. Is it a case of when these new promotions start, be like AEW, although AEW may be slightly different, you just have to get those first few years out of the way and then kind of go for it?
Yeah, I feel like TNA started with like they're famous for the X division, so they
Yeah.
started with a lot of those like high flyers like right out of the gate. And to me, that was one of the attractive things because like WWE had like some of the luchadors and stuff like that, but like I love the cruiserweights back in WCW,
Yeah.
and I was like, man, I miss this. This is awesome, and you just see these guys doing all this really cool high flying shit, and it was yeah, I'm like. And then on top of that, like like I said, you started seeing some notable names like a couple of years later as the company went on.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those things. I mean, I remember WCW myself. I was a big fan. We've had Eric Bischoff on here many times, and we always talk about the cruiserweight division. It was it was such a great thing. It's such a nice bit of variety on wrestling because sometimes it can get too samey. I feel over here, for example, in the UK, and I know we've got some great promotions over here, but I just think the style in every match is exactly the same, and I like to have that differentiator. I like it like a bit like a circus, if you get what I mean. You get the heavyweights, you get the
Right.
women, you get the tag and bits and like that.
Sure.
So when TNA first come along, we first heard about it. I remember one of the first things I saw was Elix Skipper doing that Hurricane Rana off the cage, and the commentators going crazy. But in terms of TNA, was it important that it did differentiate itself and having the six-sided ring, having the X division? It's something that perhaps wrestling didn't have as a unique selling point.
Yeah, and you had to not only for like to separate themselves visually, but like I know Jeff Jarrett touched on it a lot, like merchandise wise. He's like, this is the only way we could get on the shelves is to have a six-sided ring or to have, that you can put up the X Division structure on your ring, on the TNA rings, and you couldn't do that on the other rings. So it was a lot of it was, kind of business wise behind it instead of just being like the visual too. But I know, like, more recently it came out that a lot of the talent weren't a big fan of the six-sided rings because
Yeah.
it's just like it was more wear and tear on the body.
Yeah, it was interesting because I've never been in the six-sided ring. I've been in a wrestling ring, but not a six-sided ring. It does feel a bit. I suppose it would be quite awkward at first because you've got those extra two corners, which would
Yeah,
could make a big
like
difference.
you most wrestlers, I assume you're training on a four-sided ring, so then you like bounce off the ring and you're like, oh shit, where do I go?
Yeah, exactly that. It started off really well, as you said, with the AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Daniels, Kaz, the kind of people that come through, and you touched on it. We then got we had a Christian Cage was one of the first big jumpers
Yeah,
over
yep.
um, from the WWE, and I always think that Christian Cage really owes a lot of his career, the success of his career, in his TNA run because in WWE he was obviously look they'd done a lot of things as Christian and Edge, and when they split up, Christian was kind of floating, didn't really do
Hmm.
too much, but he really
Sure.
cemented himself as a top name in the business in TNA.
Well, he did that because, part of what helped with that was I think, TNA when they did bring him over, they said, "Listen, we're just going to push you to the moon. Like we're going to make them realize that they lost a top guy, and that's what we're going to turn you into."
Yeah, it was quite because usually when that happens, and we saw it quite a lot in the WCW WWE era, and I always felt like WWE kind of took the mid carders from WCW and
Yeah,
perhaps made them the stars. But when they brought in the Scott Steiners, the Goldbergs maybe slightly different initially. They knew what their weaknesses were, and they kind of made it worse for them. It's like Goldberg, anything over 10 minutes, he's going to start lagging. They were putting him in like long matches with like Triple H and people like that to make it like, to make him say, well, this was your top guy here,
yeah,
and,
10, buddy, you're being generous by saying 10 minutes, but I give him about five. Um, but yeah, and then like that was a big part of the mentality behind the streak too. Was just like let him go in there, squash a guy, and then do his jackhammer, and then get out of there. We don't want
yeah.
him exposed because then when he started actually wrestling guys that could expose him, it was like, all right, the gig's up.
I remember William Regal got in a lot of trouble in WCW for having a competitive match with him.
Yeah, it's like they're like Goldberg's like, "What are you doing?" It's like I'm wrestling. This is what I do.
I,
Stop that.
I love William Regal. But going back to TNA, and they had a lot of other names coming in, and you touched on another big name that the Kurt Angle was a huge one for TNA
Yeah,
back then. Kind of, it would revolutionize them to a degree to have a not legit. I don't want to say the word legitimize because I felt as if they was already legit, but when you heard the name Kurt Angle in TNA, it kind of puts a stamp on them as to how big of a company they was at the time.
sure. And he was I would say the original belt collector because at the time they had that deal going with Noah. They strapped him up with the Noah title. They strapped him up with it's like a tag champ. He was their world champ. He had on any given day he was walking around with like three or four different belts.
Yeah, and he had some of the matches. I mean, him and Joe was
Yeah.
incredible. Those
Yep.
matches. Those matches were just, blew me away in a way because Kurt Angle used to just wrestle the same way, and it wasn't as if he'd done anything differently. But it
Sure.
just felt that every match was different in many ways with Kurt.
I I think one of the things that goes under the radar a lot was his heel work in TNA too.
Oh,
Like this dude was great. I mean, like you didn't really expect it after seeing most of his WWE stuff because like the goofy stuff they had him do were like, oh, he's the American hero. You when they let him be a heel man, he tore it up. And I know there was some of that stuff he was playing off of, like him and Jeff was like real life stuff or whatever. So, maybe there was some of that playing into it. But man, that was some great stuff.
that really well. I really loved Kurt Angle in TNA. I think it was my favorite Kurt Angle actually. TNA Kurt was probably my favorite one. One thing that
Dude,
I always
a lot of people say that. Like you said it with Christian earlier.
mm,
My favorite Sting was outside of like the original like Crow. A lot of the TNA Sting was better than most of what the other stuff he did was.
oh it was.
My opinion.
He still makes me laugh as Joker Sting.
Oh yeah,
That that was tremendous. But one thing that TNA, and I think it still goes under the radar now because of how much the companies are doing more with the women. And everyone says, oh, the Divas Revolution or the Women's Revolution started with Charlotte, Bailey, Sasha. No, it didn't. It started near enough when TNA was incepted with the likes of Awesome Kong, Gal, Kim, and people like that. It started with TNA, not WWE or anywhere else.
Sure, and that's certain people feeding into a certain narrative because they don't want to give TNA the credit that they deserve. But you're absolutely right.
Because I remember Gal, Kim, and Awesome Kong, and they tore it up in the ring with their matches because they actually brought the women in to wrestle, and the women that could come in could wrestle. Not, it wasn't all about bra and panties and looking great. It was, yeah, they look great, but when that bell goes, they're just as good as the men.
Right. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Alexa, stop.
45 minutes time. Stop.
That was for me. That
Sorry.
was that's why that was the most incredible bit for me that when they could do that, and then obviously the beautiful people when that come along, and it added the bit more of that sort of, let's say, sexiness or sassiness to TNA, but they could still go as well though, Velvet and Angelina.
Sure, and I think one of the things that also goes under the radar outside of them being the ones that really start that revolution is the different wrestling styles that they use to do it. Because Awesome Kong obviously can't move like Gail Kim does, and vice versa.
Yeah,
And the fact that they were able to create the rivalry that they created over years was just incredible.
They created a great rivalry over the years, those two, and then it kind of kind of early on as well. Obviously, Russo came in, and we started to see some wackier matches. I remember that I think it was the Reverse Battle Royal. I think was
Yeah,
one, and what was the one with the red cage? What was that called? Do you remember it?
I know.
Can't remember what it was called. And then the kind of when that happens, and then they had the thing with Cornette, and if you've listened to Cornette before, he'll tell you the stories of what happened with him and Russo in TNA. And then they brought in, as you mentioned, Hulk Hogan and Bischoff. And this was when they got to a point where they were going live with Monday Night Raw.
Yep.
Now, it's easy for us to sit here now, years and years later, and say, but was it the best move for them to go live at that point, or do you think they should have just waited a bit longer and seen how it went with Hogan and Bischoff in?
I mean, I think they should have waited, and like you said, in hindsight, but like at the time, they're like, we've got the funding behind it, we've got the big names behind it. If we can, and the thing is, like, you can have the best people running the company if you're booking as shit and you're creative as shit, like people are just going to catch on and they're going to stop watching and paying attention.
And that kind of happened pretty quickly,
Yeah.
unfortunately for TNA at the time. I mean, they were bringing. I mean, they had guys like Jeff Hardy was in there as well. Let's not forget. And it's a shame with Jeff that we're not. And I know Jeff Hardy said this recently. That he said if he was wrestling how he was wrestling now, 20 years ago, he reckons he would. He reckons in his words he would be where John Cena is right now. Maybe not. Maybe hard to disagree or agree with that. But if we'd had that Jeff Hardy now, that's wrestling now in TNA, how would that have changed his career in TNA for him?
Yeah, it absolutely would have because he wouldn't have been known for that one match. Like I feel like no matter where he goes, and like even now that he came back, it just follows him that Victory Road title match.
It does. And I remember, and he returned, and I know that he returned I know he debuted in TNA as well, but I know he returned when we're talking about that cage match. He returned in that. I'm sure that he did, or he come out in that cage match. I just can't remember for the life of me what it was called. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna message you later with the name, but he come
All
in
right.
obviously. Mr. Anderson was another one that's come on here. I felt when he went to TNA, and it's a bit like, I suppose, maybe a bit like Kurt Angle. I know that Kurt left WWE. There was a lot of issues, obviously, painkillers, whatnot. But when Mr. Anderson come in to TNA, Ken Anderson, I felt that he had a point to prove because he was always the world champion material in WWE, but fell out with the incorrect crowd, so to speak, and as well as had issues with, the wellness. But he had a point to prove when he came to TNA.
Right. And it did come out recently. I think that somebody covered it where like Paul Heyman was one of the people that was like helping him with his promos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But also like after taking on WCW and then ECW and everything that happened there, like TNA is a lot like it is like it was a lot like it is now back then, where they have more opportunity to give you because they're not just bloated with tons of people that aren't doing anything. They have more opportunity to give a guy like Ken Anderson that platform, where like WWE he was lost in the shuffle.
He was, yeah, and obviously if you kind of piss off Randy Orton and John Cena, your kind of days are numbered there anyway, right?
Yeah, that too. But yeah, I mean that doesn't.
Even though the Undertaker liked him, though, he did say that he learned. I mean, we've been fortunate enough to add him on here, and he was saying that how the Undertaker helped him when he was on the SmackDown side of things, and that's where he kind of got his name. But obviously, he comes to TNA. He did win the world championship, and then it kind of, for us over here in the UK, we did lose a lot. It lost its TV deal, so it was over here on a channel called Challenge TV. It used to, it kind of a bit like WCW. We had it on Cartoon Network over here. That would fit. Johnny Bravo would finish. WCW would come on. Over here, we had it on a channel called Challenge, and that was really good. And then we lost TNA for many, many years. In your opinion, though, what kind of led to that initial drop from TNA?
You mean like the viewership or
Viewership and TV deals.
uh, just a lot of bad? Like Dixie Carter, for as good as she was, maybe like in marketing, she was like a really bad business person overall. So like she seemed like all the reports were like she was squandering money away. She was just overpaying. And that's how Anthem ended up buying the company. You know, down the line because Billy Corgan came in and floated them some money, and then Anthem ended up owing Anthem some kind of money, and then they couldn't pay, and they just defaulted on it. So Anthem took over the company essentially.
It was interesting because Billy Corgan now runs NWA, and
Yeah.
he seems to be doing okay from what I watch. I watch NWA weekly. We review it on the channel weekly, and it seems to be doing quite well. If he had managed to, say, for example, bought by TNA at the time, would we be viewing TNA where we're gonna be talking about it in a minute about where it's going to or where it's going? Would TNA have had the same success then if Billy Corgan had bought it, in your opinion?
No, and I for the same reason I think NWA doesn't. Like, I mean, they have success, like I guess in their own. I don't want to say it's not successful. It's successful like in its own right, but it's got a ceiling on it. And unless they can get like a TV deal or some kind of big streaming deal, it's just got a ceiling on it. He Billy's funding that pretty much with his own money. So like if he gets a TV deal, he can hopefully use network money and get some bigger stars and stop putting so much of his own into it. But that's what would probably end up happening. We wouldn't like you say what you want about Anthem. I know there's a lot of talk about Anthem's cheap and all this stuff. Like I think Scott D'Amore at the time when they purchased AXS TV, they spent like $850 million or something on that TV network.
Wow. So they're not exactly as bad as what people say they are. And
Right.
Billy Corgan did kind of have a TV deal, but that kind of went up the well at Samhain, as we all may have known. For those of you that watched it, those of you who didn't, Jim Mitchell snorting wasn't cocaine, but
Yeah, that cocaine spot.
yeah, that kind of ripped. That kind of they was going to go on the CW properly, and obviously then NXT went in there, and we know where that's gone since.
They claim that had nothing to do with it, and NXT just was the bigger, better product, and it took over. But I don't know if I believe that.
I'm not quite sure. I think if someone
No.
had snorted coke, I mean, that's. I mean, I remember watching it and thinking, "Jeez, like what is going
Yeah.
on?" And
What are you guys doing here? Like you finally got something good going, and you're gonna I don't know what we're doing.
yeah, it was a crazy moment in NWA anyway. But back to TNA. When did it? Because obviously for us, we've been covering it for about 3 years now. When for you did it start to sort of gain the momentum and start to kind of make that climb back up the ascendancy?
Um, Man, I would say really within the last couple of years, like because even when Anthem first bought it, they were in rebuild mode. Like they let a lot of
Yeah.
the top talent go, like Drew Galloway, now Drew McIntyre. He walked. The Hardys walked away. Like um, they lost a bunch of their top, well, not just top, but well known people. And Alberto Del Rio didn't work out. They tried to bring him in. Like to be honest with you, like I think 2024, like, and people are gonna take this a certain way, but like a lot of the stuff that's come out over the last year, like I think 2024 was and the best TNA business wise, the best year since Anthem's owned it,
Yeah.
and since 2017. You know, Scott Demore being removed from his spot, and then Anthem, the business guys in Anthem actually coming over and working with people like Tommy Dreamer and Gail Kim on the wrestling side, and those guys having the business side. They have legitimate merch deals now that they didn't really have before. They have, you know, they've grown bigger venues that they're working on. They just sold out Genesis, which it was
Yeah.
somewhere around like 4,000, between 4,000 and like 4,500 as a sellout. Um, it's just the momentum is crazy. Like I know a lot of people report talent cuts and all that stuff. Like most of those people were people that like I hate to say like label them as like friends of Scott, but they
Yeah.
were kind of friends of Scott, and they just they were people that they paid them throughout their contracts, but then when their contracts were up, they're like, well, hey, we're gonna either lessen your dates or you guys are gonna need to take a little bit of a cut. But then they re-signed a bunch of people once those people left anyway. So
Exactly that. Oh, Steel Asylum was what it was. The,
Steel
the,
Asylum, okay.
the wonders of Google. Yes, it was definitely that. Yeah, exactly that. We'll talk about Scott Demore. I mean, he over the last few years, he certainly felt for me like he was like the passion. There was a lot of passion behind him. He really wanted it to succeed from the outside looking in. I mean, I don't necessarily know that for certain, and for whatever reason, that he did leave. What was your initial reaction to the point when they actually decided they were going to bring TNA back? Because it was Impact Wrestling, it come hard to kill and all that, Ed, and it was TNA. What was your
I
initial
thought
reaction then?
I thought it was great because TNA was like, I understand why, the moniker, like how, advertisers don't like what it stands for or whatever, but
Yeah.
that was so far removed. Like TNA was the well-known brand. Impact Wrestling, people are like, what's that?
Yeah, it was really great when they brought it back. I loved
Yeah,
it when it came back as TNA, and then
for
obviously,
sure. And then they were able to get before they went to AEW, they were able to get Okada back in a TNA ring, who said he would
yeah,
never come back. They were able to get Will Ospreay in there, who put on an absolute fantastic match
yeah, he did
and
with
Hard to
Josh.
Kill last year.
Yeah, he did. And then obviously the likes of Nick Nemeth and people like that come in, and that again, that we go back to sort of getting the star power and TNA going back in the ascendancy. You don't get names like Nick Nemeth that come in after his run with WWE and come straight to TNA if they're not doing the right things.
Sure. And part of what I like with Nick Nemeth, man, is like PW Insider just said that he signed an extension not too long ago, so he's going to be in the company for a while longer. Um, and he's openly said when he started, he goes, "I'm not signing anything long term. I'll come in for." He had a couple of people text him and say, "Hey, you should check out TNA." Like he's like, "Yeah, I'll give it a shot." He agreed for like a couple dates and then a couple more and then a couple more. And he just recently said after he signed the contract, the extension, he said, "Listen, I'll be there for the long term. I'm just not signing a long term contract. Like, but I'm not going anywhere."
Yeah,
So, and one of the biggest things with a lot of the ex-WWE guys, and this seems like Nick Nemeth sets himself apart from it, is they'll bring him in for like 6 months. They'll give him a they'll give him a title run, and then they're gone. And he
yeah,
seems like, obviously he was willing to put over Joe Hendry because Hendry won the title off of him at Genesis a couple days ago.
you did.
And, that's what I want. I want the ex WWE guys that are well known, that can still wrestle in the ring. They've got that big name, and they're willing to put over lesser known, younger talents to really help them shine.
Indeed. And they are, let's face it, they certainly are. Now, one thing that I never thought I would see ever in wrestling was that WWE partnering with anyone. They'd always been WWE, and that was it. I know they've done a little bit here and there, but
Sure.
TNA now with NXT, it started last year. It's doing it now on a bigger scale by the sounds of it, multi-year agreement. And for us, for an example, for over here on NXT is over on Netflix. So internationally, I know it's not necessarily over in the States, but internationally now, if anyone from TNA turns up on NXT, they're going to show up on Netflix with a massive scale of people. Is that another thing as what could help TNA grow in international markets now that people from TNA are going to show up on NXT, which is on Netflix?
Absolutely. And I try to dig into some of this stuff, and like I'll follow all the wrestling reporters and all that.
Mhm.
And I think that a big part of WWE helping TNA, like I think WWE probably helped them get that Sportsnet Canada TV deal. I
Yeah.
think they may be trying to help them get on BT Sport or TNT Sports out there. I'm not sure. Like that seems like WWE can just give them the contacts that they had over there if they still want wrestling. You can pay TNA a fraction of what you pay WWE. And then the big one I think that's coming up is going to be the Sony deal in India.
Yeah.
I think Dave Meltzer was saying that one's up in like the end of March or early April or something. And that one could be a big one for TNA as well if they can land that. And then eventually, I think they end up this ends up opening up more doors for them in the U.S. and they end up. I think by the end of 2025, they end up on a better TV network than AXS TV.
I hope so. I hope so because they did. I mean, look, they've deserved it for the work that they've done over the last few years, anyway. Let alone partnering with the WWE, the way that they've everything has kind of turned up for us or turned up for TNA in a sense, and the way that they've worked. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now about some more recent stuff. Tessa Blanchard being back. What's your views on that?
Um, I, I'm not a big fan of her actually being back, but wrestling back the backstage politics is just she should have
Hmm.
just you know taken care of that years ago and just it would have been done by now. But wrestling wise, like you know, she's one of the best that this company has. And the reality of it is that they lost Deanna Perrazzo at the beginning
Yeah,
of last year. They lost Trinity at the beginning of last year.
yeah,
And then they're losing Jordan. They knew they were losing Jordan Grace, and so like they've hired a few knockouts throughout the year, but they really kind of needed that one like marquee to get like buzz. And I don't think it's the kind of buzz that they necessarily wanted, but I think it's going to die down. She was getting some chance in Texas, and
hmm.
I don't think that's going to continue as she stays with this company because now it came out. Fightful reported the other day that she's actually signed to the company, which a lot of us pretty much assumed, even though she said she wasn't, because why would you have her come in and work a program with Jordan Grace and then Jordan Grace put her over if she wasn't going to be around?
Exactly.
But
And of course,
they needed with some of these females that laugh like they just needed that big wrestling star that could go. And I
yeah.
think I don't necessarily agree with it, but they decided they wanted to take a gamble on Tesla. So I think it's going to backfire, but we'll see what happens.
We will. We will. What we can't deny, and as you mentioned it, I mean, the match with Jordan Grace was phenomenal at the
Yeah,
FMS.
it absolutely was.
And it was, and to be fair, Jordan Grace did bow out gracefully. She could have refused. I mean, there was rumors that she had refused to work with her, and obviously that,
Yeah,
she went out, she put her over like you normally would do on the way out, and obviously that in a week or so's time in the Royal Rumble, we're probably going to hear that familiar music again over in WWE, and that's going to be Jordan Grace coming in to potentially a WWE. But where do you think John Gresham goes? Because there's rumors that he's done as well.
yeah. I think he kind of just maybe back to Ring of Honor. That seemed like it held a special place in his heart and in
Mm.
his career. Maybe Ring of Honor, maybe AEW, maybe he just floats around the indies here and there.
Maybe.
With Jordan go to WWE, like he can be selective if he doesn't want to go, take a booking here, take a booking there. Maybe MLW, maybe he goes over to MLW for a little while. Maybe he comes back to TNA. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, he could well do. Yeah, I think 'cause didn't him and Tony Khan fall out? I thought they had some kind of issue. I don't know.
Yeah, that they did. I think he kind of apologized after that, or like realized that he kind of like overreacted to that situation, or I think they buried the hatchet at some point
Good.
after he was gone.
Well, that's a good thing. So it gives him an opportunity there. What about Josh? It sounds like Josh because he's like saying he's not doing independent dates, and
Yeah,
is that WWE? Is that NXT for Alexander?
I mean it could be like I wouldn't rule out AEW necessarily, but like
Hmm.
um, I think See, it's hard to tell. Like I think NXT, I could see him going to the main roster if he goes there. I wouldn't completely rule out him. You know, there's been a couple people speculating that like he just wants he's always wanted to know what his worth is
Yeah,
outside of TNA. He could take those offers that they give him and go back to TNA and say, "Hey, here's what they offered me. What are you guys gonna do?" And I think if they can come close, because let's be honest, like he's gonna be if he stays with TNA, he's gonna be a featured talent. You
yeah.
go a lot some of these other places, and you're just gonna be one of 7 or 8 other guys that, no offense, can do what you do and are younger and maybe don't have the injury history that you do, and you just get lost on the shuffle.
Could do. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where he goes. Who or what is 23?
I don't want it to be because I think it's going to be a big disappointment to, you go through these couple weeks of hyping it up and like, no offense to him, but like, there's a lot of people speculating that it's just Sammy Callahan like messing with people, and I don't want it to end up being that. I'd love for it to be something like Mustafa Ali coming back or something like that, but who knows, man.
We should
I don't even know if they're going to continue with that because it involved
literally.
PCO, and who knows what's going on with PCO now.
Yeah, I was literally about to say that. He smashed up the digital media title at GCW, said that he's quit TNA. Um, that would just come out of the blue. That I didn't. I mean, I knew that he was meant to be potentially finishing up, but it just come out of the blue when he done it.
Yeah, so I think it was PW Insider reported that his deal actually ended up like finished up at the end of last year, and he just agreed to work the live show and like drop the title. But I don't know. Allegedly, TNA didn't know what was going on, and they're pretty mad about him doing that. They said it was a replica title that got it. It didn't even get smashed. So whatever replica or real belt that was a great piece of gold because he hit it with a sledgehammer 3 or 4 times, and that thing is still in one piece. So
What do you think of the new X Division belt?
I loved it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it looked great, didn't it? And
Yeah,
Moose is a guy that I think like because he's not necessarily X Division size or anything like that, but he can bump like an X Division star, Moose.
yeah. That's one thing I love about the X Division, man. It's like and I think that's part of why like they decided to put it on Moose. It's like there's no size limits. There's no like
No.
you can do anything, and like to move like Moose moves, and to move like for a lot of these other guys to move like that. Jake Something's been in Ultimate X matches. Who'd ever thought they'd see Jake Something competing for the X Division title? It's fantastic.
Yeah, indeed. It's brilliant. I love it. I think it's great. And obviously this coming week on TNA quickly, we're going to have the NXT Tag Team Championships on the line with Axiom and Fraser against the Rascals, which should be killer of a match.
Oh, that should be great.
And Cora Jade potentially. She's going to potentially come in with Masha Slamovich. I mean, that alone could well be an absolute show stealer when that happens.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're going for, but I think they're gonna wait until tonight to announce it on NXT. I think Masha's gonna show up there and they're gonna announce it tonight.
Yeah, she was
Because
there last
otherwise,
week as well.
after Cora confronted her, if you're not announcing it tonight, I don't know why you waited so long. You got
It is.
it's 2 days away, so
Exactly that. And a live, again, the live impact. Is this kind of, I wouldn't say a test, but like, everyone's going to care about the number, right? That's what everyone's going to, a lot of Twitter and everyone's, like, oh, the number and the rating. But is it going to be a big test to see what they pull in?
I don't know if it's necessarily gonna be a task because here's the thing about AXS TV is like whether it's recorded or live, like TNA gets the top viewership on that network no matter what.
Yeah.
So like compared to everything else on that network, which is why I think they need to get off of it. Compared to everything else on that network, which is mostly music, like
Yeah.
they're the top guys, and it's not really going to matter what number they put out. They're going to be the top number. But I don't think that's what you should strive for. I think the better thing is going to be like, what's the attendance going to look like? Because here's the thing: if you put up some good attendance. The last time they were in this building was September for Victory Road. They put up 2,100, a sold out show, 2,100 fans. If
Hmm.
you put 2,100 fans in the building now, that means in a span of 4 days, you combine that with Slammiversary, you've just put 6,000 people and fans in seats in 4 days for
Yeah.
2 shows. Plus, they got a TV taping on Friday, so you're talking about possibly another 1,500 to 2,000. You're talking about potentially 8,000 fans in 5 days.
Incredible work for TNA. Incredible.
Fantastic.
Really exciting year for TNA for sure. The last question I'm going to ask you, Gerard, before I let you go, and it's going to be a bit of a difficult one. I want you to pick your top 3 TNA matches of all time.
The one's going to be a classic, man. That Daniels, Joe, and AJ Styles.
Yeah, always. Yeah, yeah.
Man, I think in recent years, like Josh and Will Ospreay's got to be one of them.
Yeah, definitely.
I would even say like I'm a huge fan of like the knockouts. The Mickey James, sorry, the Mickey James and Deonna Purrazzo, that Texas death match, that was one of my all-time favorites.
There you go. There's your top 3. We'll take that. And then just quickly, lastly, this coming up weekend, or this coming Thursday, we've already mentioned it, Fraxon versus the Rascals. And we're going to hear from the new TNA World Heavyweight Champion, Joe Hendry. They've just announced that he's going to be talking this week on TNA Wrestling. Gerard, it's been great talking to you about all things TNA. I've loved it. I can't wait for TNA. I can't wait for TNA in 2025. Just want to shout out TNA UK as well. Thanks for inviting us to be part of media. We get some roster members every now and again for an interview. We're very, very privileged for that. But Gerard, it's been fantastic talking to you. We'll obviously be chatting, I think, on social media about TNA as the weeks go on and see how we get on. But thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And we'll definitely keep in touch on the internet.
Thanks for having me, buddy. I appreciate it.
No worries. Still, guys, just follow us on HCTB on X, HCTB on YouTube, In the Turnbuckle Podcast on Instagram. And Gerard, where can they find you guys on BodySlam?
They can find us at BodySlam.net on Twitter. They can find me on Bear Down 316 on Twitter. Chicago Bears just signed Ben Johnson, which is the top head coach we wanted. Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Gerard at bodyslam.net.
There you go. And my co-host is a Commanders fan, by the way.
Good team, man. Great team this year.
He's excited. He's one game away from the Super Bowl. You know?
They did a great job of rebuilding that team.
They did, and he's beyond excited right now. I can't tell you how excited he is. But anyway, George, thanks so much for coming on. Guys, keep it locked on the channel. We've got some NWA interviews coming up as well, potentially a TNA one. I'm just waiting to find out, so hopefully that will happen soon. But until then, everybody, buckle down, stay safe, and good.